This is an open letter to the Right Honourable British Foreign Minister, Mr. James Cleverly. Dear Mr. Cleverly, whilst I was very pleased to see your visit to China went well, I'm disappointed with your parting gesture. The last thing I wish to see is the UK doing badly. I have many friends and family still living there, some of whom even voted for you. You mentioned the challenges of doing business with China, and I'm going to enter this dialogue with some information you may find disturbing because it completely contradicts your information. It is telling that not one person from the British Embassy in China or any of its consulates have ever been to Xinjiang or provided you with a report from the ground there. This indicates one of two things, I think. Your office either believes there is a genocide going on there and doesn't care enough to do anything about it, which is hard to believe, or your office knows there is no genocide there and doesn't want to face the inconvenient truth. I sincerely hope that you, personally, have been misled and are not willfully partaking in this deceit. I'm not under any illusions that you would know who I am, so I'm going to provide a brief introduction here. My name is Jerry Gray. I'm a British-born Australian citizen who for the last 2 decades has been a resident of Zhongshan City in Guangdong Province, China. From 1977 to 1987, I was a twice commended member of the British Police. First of all, in the Met, my number was 884A Division. And if you wish, I will privately provide my warrant number so that this may be verified. Then moving to Essex during my time in the British Police, I was fortunate enough to have been selected to work inside Buckingham Palace. I've personally met our late Queen several times, King Charles many times, and I was, I think, a friend to Lady Diana Spencer before she became the Princess of Wales. Given this background, it's highly unlikely that as a young man between the ages of 18 and 28, I was anything other than reliable. I moved to Australia shortly after serving many weeks on the miners' strike in a role that made me feel decidedly uncomfortable, as my late grandfather was a South Shields coal miner for his entire working life. The role of a police officer on a picket line can indeed instill some difficult thoughts, which caused me to reassess my own life choices. I paid scant attention to anything political for most of my life, but in 2020, recently retired and locked down due to COVID-19, I started out of boredom posting photographs and stories of my travels in China onto Twitter, now X. That decision turned my life around so much because I've found that almost everything I say online, which is based on my personal observations and experiences, attracts the kind of criticism that you yourself have made of China. Since defending my personal observations became a necessary habit, I continued to become a published writer. I've written several articles internationally, mostly for John Menadue's Australian public policy journal called Pearls and Irritations, and I'm sure he would endorse my words as being reliable. John is a former diplomat, an advisor to several Australian prime ministers, and I'm sure you know John Menadue's work, but if you do not, then your advisors are indeed keeping you in the dark. I think I am unique in the foreign community in China, as I've traveled to almost every province and region, but it's not that which makes me unique. What makes me unique is that I've traveled by bicycle, doing the hard yards, climbing hills, mountains, crossing deserts. I've ridden in excess of 30,000 kilometers by road in China, and none of it on highways, all through small regional roads. In doing so, my wife and I have raised significant sums of money for disabled people in our community, and we've become quite well known inside of China. So much so that several TV documentaries have been made about us, most recently by CGTN Europe from the UK, linked in the description if you wish to watch it. But more importantly, we've seen progress at village, county, and rural town level that make what China has achieved in the last 20 years almost incomprehensible to anyone who has not witnessed the significant and hugely beneficial changes to rural China. It's this experience that makes me both unique in the foreign community and an avid supporter of China, as well as the governing Communist Party. Whilst I wouldn't for 1 second consider myself to be a communist or even a socialist, I have to concede, I've never seen a more collaborative and consultative method of governance, one that engages and benefits its constituents in ways that Western democracy proponents would find unimaginable. So when people ask, do I support the CPC? My answer is yes. At this period in history, I support everything I've seen them doing. I can't speak for the past. I won't speculate on the future, but I will say, and I stand by this fact, that China, under Xi Jinping, is a much better place for 1.4 billion people than any other place I've lived or traveled to. And is in fact a far better place than it was when I arrived here in 2004. I've been disparagingly described in Western media as a retired security guard, a cyclist in China, a Beijing apologist, and many other names, but I speak only from experience and support with my research. My one main regret is that the 2 times I traveled across Xinjiang by bike, I wasn't interested in the politics, and I didn't make the kind of videos or take the kind of pictures I should have taken in order to refute the narrative that you believe to be true. It is not true, I assure you. 2004 was not my first trip to the region, but it was the first time I traveled in Xinjiang by bike, cycling across the regional border from Gansu through a place called Xinjiang, Starry Gorge. I traveled approximately 1,500 kilometers to the border with Kazakhstan at Korgash. But once we'd arrived at Urumqi or Wulumuqi, we dismantled the bikes, we hired drivers and cars, and we visited several different areas inside Xinjiang, including the grasslands and the Heavenly Mountains or Tian Shan. During that trip, we saw no evidence of oppression. We met, mingled with, and interacted daily with Uyghurs, Kazakhs, Mongols, Tajiks, and Kyrgyz who were living normal lives. In 2019, my wife and I flew to Urumqi, Urumqi, and we had our bikes shipped there. We assembled the bikes and we started to ride out of the region through a different route, crossing the Taklamakan Desert through the Tarim Basin. And this is not meant to be a geography lesson. This is only to demonstrate that in almost 5,000 kilometers of travel inside Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region, I've seen no evidence of oppression, persecution, and absolutely nothing like a genocide going on. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I'm not so naive as to suggest that there haven't been some problems there. Clearly they have. There is an enhanced security in the region. Checkpoints are regular, but the police are polite and in most cases kind and helpful. They provided clean water, gave us fruit, they were curious as to the nature of our journey, and I should add that my wife is Han Chinese and got no special attention. I, as a foreigner, may have, but the main point is that at these checkpoints, we witnessed hundreds of people passing through automatically by scanning their cards and being recognized in the system. The police were obliged to manually input my data as their automated systems of card and facial recognition don't have foreign passports registered. Once again, it's an observation that I can make because I've seen many thousands of Xinjiang residents, including Uyghurs, using the system, and I've seen no evidence of abuse, oppression. And then when asked about it, these people assure me, every person replies with a similar answer. It's safer than it used to be, so it's okay. Personally, I don't like it. I'm a Westerner and I find this kind of imposition to be intrusive, but to the local Chinese, it's a daily part of their lives and they see no issue with it at all. And here's where things break down in misunderstandings. We, Westerners, impose our sense of individualism onto a society that has a sense of communalism. We see things differently to them. We're bothered by it, but they're not. Organizations such as Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and of course the US State Department, among many others, feel it's okay to impose our Western values and ideals on a society with differing expectations, always without having any feedback from the local community. Not one of the above-mentioned organizations has visited Xinjiang and asked the people there what they feel about the security measures. I have. There hasn't been a terrorist incident in the region, or in China at all for that matter, since these checks were imposed. And this is a matter of great pride, not just for the Chinese government, but for the people who communally work together to make this happen. This is not something the Chinese people need rescuing from. Now, some people call me naive. I've been accused in mainstream media of looking at China through my rose-tinted glasses, and to some extent that's true. However, I'm not, as I've been described, a retired security guard who rides a bike. I was a general manager in Australia for a British company, Chubb Security, and during my career I've taken security systems, access control, closed-circuit television and perimeter protections to many government buildings. At some stages in my career, I've entered almost every prison in the UK and in Queensland, Australia. So I know what a prison looks like, and I certainly know what oppression looks like. During my time as a police officer, I was on the front lines of the Brixton riots. I was at Lewisham during the National Front campaigns and one of the first officers in mainland Britain ever to be deployed with a riot shield. I was front and centre when the miners' strike hit the UK, spending many weeks in the coalfields of northern and northwest England. During that time, I discovered very much what police brutality and oppression looked like, and was in fact a part of it. I've also attended the scenes of IRA bombs, one of which killed Airy Neve in our own Palace of Westminster. Your Braintree connection to Mr. Neve should be a stark reminder of how terrorism affects us all at home. I'm very aware of the consequences of terrorism. Clearly, this background of mine gives me an insight that is more observational than that of a normal tourist in any region. I do notice things. It's part of my DNA. And if I didn't notice oppression and persecution in Xinjiang, it's because there isn't any. Almost everything negative that I have read about Xinjiang can be reasonably explained. For example, the satellite imagery identified by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, so defined by a 20-something-year-old undergraduate with absolutely no experience in this field to identify buildings as prisons. They are simply what China says they are, schools and factories. The reason he misidentifies them is because he's never set foot in China, nor has he seen the way a school or a factory is constructed here in China. Because of the huge distances and the migratory nature of workforces, there are workers' dormitories, and these are identified by ASPI as cells. Because of the issues of security in a country which until recently was racked with poverty and terrorism, there are security walls, fences, manned gates and barbed wire. These are on almost every building in China. Grills or bars on the window. Even my own apartment here has these installed before I bought it. Chinese school uniform. Chinese wear school uniforms all the time. Chinese factories wear uniforms all the time. ASPI not only misinterprets this, but confuses these as prisons because of their bias. Staff are seen moving from one place to another wearing a uniform, and a biased mind interprets a prison. A knowledgeable, informed, or experienced mind knows it's not a prison. Every school, even kindergarten in China, has 2 uniformed police officers outside the gate as kids go in and when they come out. And this is because a few years ago, you might recall, there were incidents of knife-wielding madmen entering schools and killing kids, as well as teachers. This will probably never happen again in China due to these measures. Seeing the police officers at the gate is not considered authoritarian by the kids. They love it. They salute and they shake hands with, or at least say hi to the officers. One of the other sources of information is a man called Adrian Zenz, who is a religious zealot, and that's not my opinion. He's the author of books. He's openly stated his God has sent him on a mission to destroy the Communist Party of China. The final source of stories for the narrative is that of the Xinjiang diaspora in various countries, who seem to have limitless funds and offices in dubious locations connected to the US intelligence organizations, and who are regularly paraded in front of us at various different tribunals with stories, many of which differ from the story they previously told, and none of them ever being tested under oath or cross-examination. One thing that's never been explained to me or anyone else with any interest in how these people left China with a passport or a visa, because there are no refugee camps on any of the Xinjiang borders. So, as I reach the end of this letter, I can assure you there's a lot more information on China which is far more on the positive balance than the negative. And to paraphrase Samuel Clements, claims of China's demise are greatly exaggerated. China has built all kinds of infrastructure, hospitals, schools, universities, vocational colleges. It has more bridges, roads and ports than any other country. It has more high-speed rail, more frequent slow-speed rail trains than any other country. And I can vouch for the fact that 5G is available in every part of China, something no other country can boast. I recently traveled through poverty alleviation programs in Yunnan, Hunan, Sichuan and Guangxi-Zhuang autonomous regions without having a single issue on connectivity or having my safety or security endangered in any way. Huawei is just about to release a 5.5G and already working on a viable 6G. China has 1.4 billion people, which includes 56 ethnicities, and has lifted half of them out of abject poverty in the last 40 years. China still has over 200 languages still alive and active inside the country. And while there is one language for the nation, each of these ethnicities and many regional communities use their own language in their day-to-day lives. Announcements in public places, road signs, and many other indicators, including China's own currency, display clear evidence of this. China has gone from being one of the poorest countries in the world during our lifetime and now has a 60% attendance in tertiary education, a 99+% literacy rate. Imagine just a generation into the future, China will have produced over 500 million tertiary education graduates. China has a life expectancy on a par with the developed world and now far in excess of the United States. China has written off many debts to the third world countries. It's provided millions in vaccines, PPEs, and medical teams to more countries than any other to help overcome the recent pandemic. But China is not only virtually crime-free, it's one of the safest places in the world to live. Bring up kids is a joy here. We can enjoy a lifestyle that is second to none. It's hardly surprising that a recent poll of 32 countries found China at the top of the world in ranking global happiness. In short, everything you know about China being a threat is untrue, and every fact stated here is verifiable. Your advisors may very well disagree with me, but not one person can prove any of this is wrong. They can only offer opinions that my knowledge or my experience might be different. They can tell you I'm naive and not fully informed. They can state that I could have been misled, or, as is most common, that I am paid for my opinions, and that therefore they're not worth considering, little realizing that those very people advising you are paid for their opinions, while I am not. Also, ironically unaware that their information is from reading, analyzing, and not from visiting and experiencing. It matters not who is paid for what story. What matters is, does the person telling it have the experience, the knowledge, and the supporting information to prove that it's true? If not, they may be selling propaganda. If they do, then whether or not we like the message has some truth. and acceptance is inevitable, unless we are either too ill-informed to realize it or too biased to accept it. And this is where we stand on China now. Experts do not have the experience or knowledge of modern China to speak with authority. Most journalists have never been to China, or in the case of some have, but they lived their entire career inside of what I would call an expat bubble. And they've not experienced the kind of China that I have, the kind that they need to experience to form legitimate opinions. Some people, including academics who do speak out on behalf of China, are pilloried in the media and even in Parliament under parliamentary privilege by people you know well, but who have less knowledge, less experience, and are less ethical than those people who are prepared to stand up. And I'll leave you with this one thought. If the four aspects, a possible Taiwan invasion, the restrictions of freedom in Hong Kong, the human rights issues in Tibet, and the Xinjiang narrative are all proven to be false, which they are, where is the threat from China? China is not your enemy. The people telling you China is your enemy are the real enemy. Best wishes from Zhongshan in China, and I look forward to hearing back from you or your office. Signed, Jerry Gray.